Montana Territory, September 1883. The woman collapsed face first into the hay before he even got a word out. Zebediah Kittredge stood frozen in the open stable door, sunlight flaring behind him, a pitchfork still in his hand. She had stumbled in from the back path, her dress torn at the hem, bonnet hanging by a single ribbon, and her boots caked in dust and blood. He dropped the fork and lunged forward. "Madam? Madam, hey!" He knelt beside her, heart hammering. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, and when he pushed her hair back to check her head, he felt heat pouring off her. "Fever. You're burning up," he muttered, more to himself than her. The horses stirred in their stalls, snorting. Zebediah lifted the woman gently, noting how light she was, too light. She had not eaten in days. He carried her out of the stable and into the house, past the porch where the wind played with a forgotten shawl. He laid her on the settee in the front room, wiping sweat from her brow with a clean cloth. "You better not die on me, ma'am. You already came too far." She woke that evening barely. Her eyes fluttered open, blue as a spring sky, wild and confused. Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely there. "My name's Zebediah Kittredge. This is my ranch just east of Fort Benton. You collapsed in my stable." She blinked at him, trying to sit up. He pressed her shoulder gently. "Do not try to move. You were sick. Fever's got you. I need my letter." She coughed, dry and painful. "I came to marry a man. He lives here." Zebediah frowned. "There is no other man here. I was told." "Zebediah Kittredge." She was shaking now, tears starting in her eyes. "That's the name. I was answering your letter." He stared at her, stunned. "I never wrote for a bride." Her lips trembled. "He said you did. The man in St. Louis. He showed me the letter with your name. Told me I had a place. A future." Zebediah sat back, jaw tight. "You were lied to." She turned her face away, silent tears soaking into the cushion. Zebediah stood, ran a hand over his face, then moved to stoke the fire. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Josephine Callahan." Her voice broke when she said it. She stayed in his house for days. Zebediah brought her broth, changed her soaked linens, and sat beside her as she slept. He had always kept to himself, even after his father passed and left him the land. But this woman, this stranger, had tumbled into his world like a storm, and somehow it felt like she belonged there. By the 5th day, she could sit up on her own. "I am sorry," she said, looking out the window. "I did not mean to be trouble." "You are not," Zebediah said, setting a tray beside her. "You were tricked. That is not on you." She looked at him then, really looked. His face was rough-hewn, but his eyes were kind. There was something in the way he moved, quiet, steady, like the land itself, that made her feel safe. "I have no money," she said. "No family left." Zebediah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Where did you come from?" "St. Louis. I worked in a dress shop until I could not anymore. Then someone told me about the mail-order bride agency. I thought—" She swallowed. "I thought maybe someone would want me." Zebediah's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "You are not something to be wanted or not. You are someone." She stared at him, eyes wide. Early October brought frost. Josephine began helping around the house, folding linens, sweeping the porch. She moved slowly, still regaining her strength. Zebediah watched her from the barn sometimes, the way she paused to press her hand to the window like she was trying to memorize the view. One afternoon, she came into the barn as he brushed down his gelding. "You built all this?" she asked, stepping over a rake. "Every beam," he nodded. She ran her hand along the stall rails. "It is beautiful." He glanced at her. "Not the word I would have used. But thank you." She smiled a little. "Do you live out here all alone?" "I did." His voice was quiet. "Until you." Josephine looked at him slowly, that same smile hovering. "You did not ask for me." "No," he said. "But I am not sorry you came." She blinked, turned away, brushing her fingers along the horse's mane. "I have nowhere else to go." Zebediah walked closer. "Then stay." She turned back to him, eyes shining. As what? He swallowed. As whatever you want to be. That night, she cried quietly in the back bedroom, curled up with one of his flannel shirts. The next morning, she cooked him breakfast and they sat on the porch as the sun lit the hills gold. I used to dream of this, she said, sipping coffee. A place where no one knew all the hard things about me. Just a quiet start. Zebediah turned to her. You have that now. 2 weeks passed. She grew stronger, her cheeks fuller, steps surer. They laughed over supper, shared long silences by the fire. He started to notice things, how her laugh caught in her throat, how she looked at him when she thought he was not looking. One wind-blown afternoon, she stood on the porch with a letter in her hand. It came, she said. He stepped out beside her. What is it? The agency. I wrote them. I asked about the man who sent me. They say there is no record of him. Zebediah's jaw clenched. He tricked you. Might have done it before. She nodded. I was so stupid. You were not, he said. You were brave. She looked up at him, eyes full. You healed me, Zebediah. I do not think I would have made it if it was anyone else who found me. He touched her hand, gentle. You are not just something that happened to me, Josephine. You are the best thing that ever did. She blinked at that, tears slipping down her cheek. I do not know what I am supposed to do now. He stepped closer. You do not have to figure it out alone. Their hands stayed linked. The cold brushed past them, but neither moved. That night, Zebediah sat alone in the barn, remembering the moment she fell through the door, how everything had changed in a blink. He realized something then: she had come to be a bride, and without meaning to, she had already become his future. A late frost settled on the grass, silvering the fields just beyond the house. Josephine stood barefoot on the kitchen planks, arms wrapped around herself as she watched the breath of morning rise from the cattle. The stove behind her gave a steady warmth, but she didn't move from the window. Zebediah's steps sounded on the porch, boots scraping dry wood. When he entered, he paused just inside the door, carrying the scent of cold air and leather. You ain't dressed for the morning, he said, setting his gloves on the table. I couldn't sleep much. The quiet's different here, she answered, eyes still on the horizon. In the city, even at night, things moved. He poured water into the basin, rolling his sleeves. Out here, the stillness is a kind of company. She turned at that. You've been alone a long time. He nodded, washing his hands. Since my father passed. Before that, it was just the two of us. He never took to crowds, and I suppose I learned the same. Josephine crossed to the stove, fingers brushing the handle of the coffee pot. Did he teach you the work? Every inch of it. He was a hard man, but honest. The land didn't leave room for anything else. She poured 2 cups, her hands steadier than they'd been a week ago. Mine was a carpenter. He built church pews, fine ones. After he died, I tried to keep the shop running, but they wouldn't buy from a woman. Not for long. Zebediah accepted the cup she offered, studying her face with quiet intent. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? She said, a gentle challenge in her voice. I didn't expect anyone, he said. But if I had, it wouldn't have been someone with your steel. She laughed softly, the sound low and surprised. I didn't know I had any left. He watched her a moment longer, then looked away. You planning to stay through the winter? I don't have anywhere else to go. That wasn't what I meant. She met his eyes then. I know. That afternoon, she ventured into the root cellar for the first time, sorting through potatoes and jars of preserved peaches, setting aside what had spoiled. Zebediah was outside repairing the fence on the north side, and she could hear the distant thud of the mallet, steady as heartbeat. When she climbed the ladder back up, she found a folded wool shawl waiting on the top step. She carried it to him as the sun fell low. You left this for me, she said, the wind tugging at her skirt. You get cold easy, he replied, not looking up from the post he was setting. She knelt beside the fence, letting the silence settle around them for a long minute. I don't know how to be useful here. Not in the way you are. You already are, he said simply. How? You listen, he said. You see things. That's rarer than folks think. She turned her face toward the trees. Most men I've known only noticed what they wanted. Zebediah laid down the mallet. I'm not most men. No, she said. You aren't. There was no rush to anything between them. The days passed in steady rhythm, morning chores, shared meals, evenings by the fire with the sound of wind moving through the eaves. Josephine began sewing again, piecing together the remnants of fabric she'd found in a trunk upstairs. Her hands remembered the motions even if her confidence hadn't returned yet. One evening, after supper, she showed him a shirt she'd mended. You don't throw much away, she said, smoothing the sleeve. Out here, you don't get to, Zebediah replied. She studied the stitching. You could have sent me into town. Let me find work or lodging. He leaned back in his chair, firelight warming the angles of his face. I didn't want to. Josephine looked down at the thread in her fingers. I think I would have stayed even if you had. Zebediah's voice was quiet. Then I'm glad I didn't. Later that week, he brought her to the Westridge where the land rose into soft hills and the cottonwoods still held a few stubborn leaves. She rode behind him, arms light around his waist, her cheek resting against the back of his coat. When they reached the top, he dismounted first, then helped her down. They stood in silence, watching the river trace blue through the valley below. My mother used to tell me, she said, that the world's too wide to stay broken in one place forever. Zebediah turned toward her. She sounds like she knew something worth remembering. She died when I was 16, Josephine said. But I still hear her sometimes. Especially when I'm about to do something I haven't done before. Zebediah stepped closer, the wind pressing the grass low around them. What are you thinking about doing now? She looked up at him, the sky behind her turning lavender with dusk. Something I might not be ready for. He didn't reach for her, didn't move any closer. He just waited. I've been someone's problem before, she said. I don't want to be that again. You're not, he said. You never were. She took a long breath and then, slowly, she reached for his hand. He didn't speak. He just laced their fingers together and held on. The first snow came early that year, brushing the tops of the hills with white and settling between fence posts like quiet breath. Josephine had never seen snow fall on open land before. It moved differently here, slower somehow, as if the sky knew there was more room to fill. She stood at the edge of the front porch with her shawl wrapped tight, eyes following the flakes as they drifted past the lantern post. Zebediah was cutting firewood by the shed, the steady rhythm of his axe cracking through the stillness. She watched the muscles of his back shift beneath his coat, the motion deliberate, unhurried. Nothing he did ever felt wasted. When he saw her watching, he lowered the axe and wiped his hands on a strip of burlap. You're not cold. I'm warm enough, she said. I've been thinking. He walked toward her, his boots crunching over the frozen ground. About what? She stepped back so he could come up beside her. About the space between what we expect and what we get. How sometimes that space turns out to be better. He leaned against the porch rail. You talking about here? She nodded. And you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and picked a fleck of straw from the edge of her shawl. She felt the touch through the wool like it was skin. I've got a parcel of land west of the ridge, he said. Used to belong to a neighbor, but he moved down to Helena last spring. It's flat enough for a garden. Maybe chickens if someone had the mind for it. Josephine turned to him slowly. Are you offering it to me? I'm offering it to us, he said. If you want to build something that's yours as much as mine. She studied his face. There was no performance in him. Just quiet certainty, like stone warmed by sun. I've never had a piece of anything, she said. Not like that. You'd have it now. Her fingers wrapped tighter around the edge of her shawl. And what would I be to you? He looked down at his hands. You'd be the woman I choose. Not because I'm lonely. Not because you need a place. But because I want to build a life with you. She exhaled, slow and full. If you'd asked me a month ago what I wanted, I'd have said a warm bed and a roof. Now I want to plant things. Watch them grow. He smiled, not wide, just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. Then we'll start with that. They walked the parcel the next morning, boots crunching over frost-laced grass. Josephine wore one of his coats, the sleeves folded at the wrists, and carried a small notebook she'd found in a drawer. She paused often, sketching rough outlines of where beds might go, where a coop could sit, where a line of stones might border a path. Zebediah kept to her pace, letting her move ahead, only speaking when she asked a question. When they reached a low rise at the south end of the parcel, she stopped and turned toward him. "Will you build the house?" "With you," he said. She looked out over the land. "I used to think I'd spend my life behind someone else's counter, sewing hems and watching other people's children grow. I never thought I'd stand on a rise and plant something that belonged to me." He stepped beside her. "It'll belong to both of us." She looked up at him when teasing a strand of hair loose from her braid. "I want to marry you, Zebediah. Not because I need to. Because I trust you." He didn't speak right away. Instead, he took her hand and lifted it to his chest, pressing it there like an oath. "We'll do it proper. Pastor rides out here every second Sunday. We can have it done before the next snow settles deep." Her voice was steady. "I don't want a dress from a catalog or a crowd. Just you. And maybe a ribbon in my hair if I can find one. That's more than enough." They stood there till the cold chased them back to the house. The days that followed moved with quiet purpose. Josephine cleared the pantry and took stock of what would last through winter. Zebediah mended a broken hinge on the back door and carved a small wooden box for her keepsakes. When she asked what had made him think to do it, he only said, "You'll need somewhere to put the pieces of your old life. Doesn't mean you have to carry them." On the morning of the wedding, the land was silvered with hoarfrost and the sky held the hush of snow not yet fallen. Pastor Avery arrived bundled in a wool coat and smelling of pipe tobacco and saddle leather. Josephine wore her hair braided and pinned, a blue ribbon tied at the end, the one she'd once used to bind letters she never sent. They stood beneath the cottonwood at the edge of the field, Zebediah's hand around hers, her fingers calm and sure. There were no vows beyond what they meant, no promises beyond what they'd already lived. She looked into his eyes and saw only steadiness. He looked into hers and saw the future he didn't know he'd been waiting for. When it was done, he kissed her gently, careful as if he were still afraid of breaking something, and she leaned into him like she'd known his shape her whole life. That night, they sat beside the fire, her legs curled beneath her, his arm resting behind her on the settee. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because something had settled like a stone finally finding its place in the riverbed. Josephine traced a line along the grain of the wood between them. "You said once I wasn't something that happened to you. That I was the best thing." He looked over at her, face softened by firelight. "I meant it." She touched his knee, her voice no louder than the crackle of the flames. "You're mine now. Not because I wanted a husband. Because I found a man worth building a life beside." His hand found hers, warm and calloused, and they sat like that as the fire burned low and the wind moved gentle across the hills, carrying no sorrow with it. The snow deepened through November, muffling hoofbeats and quieting the world beyond the split rail fence. Josephine moved through the house with more ease now, the rhythm of frontier life settling into her bones like the warmth of wool after cold rain. Her hands no longer trembled when she kneaded dough, and Zebediah had taken to leaving small pieces of cut cedar on the windowsill, each one carved smooth for her to sand and shape, a quiet invitation to keep making something with her hands. She sat one evening by the hearth, a square of muslin stretched taut in her lap, needle rising and falling through the fabric. A sprig of wild rose began to take shape beneath her fingers. Zebediah watched from the table, where he was oiling the hinges of a hand plane. "You ever think about naming the land?" he asked, voice low under the crackle of the fire. "The parcel?" she said, glancing up. "I didn't know folks did that unless they had 1,000 acres and a title deed framed on the wall." "Not for anyone else's sake," he said. "Just ours. A name to mark the start of something." She set the hoop in her lap. "My mother used to say names have weight. You put one on a place or a person, you better mean it." "I do," he said. "Mean it, I mean." She studied his face, the way his eyes stayed on the fire even as his hands kept working. "You have something in mind already?" He set the plane aside. "I was thinking of calling it Rose Trace. For how you came here." Josephine looked down at the half-finished bloom on her cloth. "Because I left everything behind?" "Because you survived it," he said. Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Then Rose Trace it is." The first frost-hardened rutabagas came out of the ground in early December, and Josephine boiled them with bay leaves Zebediah had traded for at the post. One night, after supper, she found him in the loft above the stable, sanding planks with a rough sleeve rolled to his elbow. "You planning something?" she asked. "A cradle," he said, not looking up. She hesitated. "There's not a child." "Not yet," he said. "But there will be." Josephine climbed the short ladder and stepped onto the boards. "You're sure about that?" He turned to her then, the lamplight catching on the edge of his jaw. "I've never been more sure of anything." She stood in the stillness, surrounded by the scent of pine and dust, her hand resting on a beam worn smooth by years of use. "I never thought I'd be a mother." "You will be a good one," he said. She looked at the half-shaped sides of the cradle. "You already started." "I work better when my hands are busy," he said. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I want to be ready." She moved to the edge of the woodpile and ran her fingers across the slats. "I worry about what I don't know." "You'll learn," he said. "We both will." She leaned against the post beside him. "I never saw myself in a place like this. Not with a man who listens more than he speaks." He held her gaze. "And now? I don't want to be anywhere else." That night, she lay awake listening to the wind pushing snow against the shutters. Zebediah's breathing was slow beside her, one arm curled beneath the quilt. She turned toward him, hand resting lightly on his chest. "Zebediah?" He stirred. I want to plant plum trees come spring." His eyes opened, heavy with sleep. "You will." "I want to make jam. And line the pantry with jars. I want to walk the ridge barefoot in June and know that nothing I left behind was better than what I have now." He reached for her hand in the dark. "You already have it." In the weeks that followed, she began sketching out plans for the garden. Zebediah cleared the parcel near the creek, chopping back dead brush so roots would have room. She stitched curtains for the windows in the new house and asked him to build a bench for the porch, one wide enough for two. When the snow broke in March, early meltwater ran through the gullies and turned the road to the ridge into soft clay. Josephine stood at the edge of the field in her work boots, the hem of her dress pinned up, her hands dirty from marking the rows. Zebediah came up behind her, wiping his palms on a cloth. "First time I saw you, I thought you were dead." "I thought I might be," she said. He nodded toward the rows. "Now look." She shielded her eyes against the morning light. "It feels like we're growing things just by standing still." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "I reckon we are." As the sun rose higher, they stood in the damp soil, shoulder to shoulder, the land opening around them in every direction, unclaimed not by law, but by memory. And they claimed it now, not with deed or title, but with the quiet weight of belonging. The first green broke through the soil in mid-April, thin as thread and stubborn. Josephine crouched at the edge of the garden row, brushing dirt gently away from a tender sprout. Her knees were damp from the earth, and the sun sat low enough in the sky to catch in the loose curls that had slipped from her braid. Zebediah leaned against the fence nearby, a hammer slung through his belt. "You named that one yet?" She sat back on her heels. "I was thinking of calling it Hope, but that might be foolish." "Not foolish," he said, "just honest." A pair of geese passed overhead, their wings catching a hush in the air that made her pause. She wiped her palms on her apron and stood. "I was thinking," she said, brushing her hands together, "I might start keeping a ledger. Not for money, just to mark the days. What we plant, what we see, feels like something worth remembering." Zebediah opened the garden gate and stepped through, boots soft in the tilled soil. "You want paper? I can ride into town next week. I'll ask around." "I can stitch one together," she said, voice light. "I've got scraps and needle enough. I used to make little books when I was a girl, write stories in the margins." He looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "What kind of stories?" "Ones where nobody left," she said. "Where people stayed when it got hard." Zebediah reached for her hand. "You don't have to write that one anymore. You're living it now." His hand was warm, calloused, and steady in hers. She studied the lines of his wrist, the dirt beneath his nails, the way his thumb moved once against her skin without thought. There was nothing hurried between them. Even their closeness had grown like the land, slow, deliberate, and rooted deep. That evening she lit a lantern on the hearth and set a pot of lye soap to cure by the window. Zebediah brought in a bundle of kindling and stacked it beside the stove, then lingered at the table watching her tie the last strip of cloth over the mold. "You ever miss it?" he asked. She turned. "St. Louis?" He nodded, resting his forearms on the edge of the table. "The noise, the crowds, even the dresses. I miss knowing where the streetcar would stop," she said after a moment. "And the smell of rain on stone. But not the rest. Not the way folks looked through you when you didn't have something they wanted." Zebediah looked at her for a long breath. "You never have to earn your place here." She crossed the room and set her hand on his shoulder. "I already feel it. Every day." He reached up, fingers wrapping around hers. "I want to build a small shed near the trees. For tools. Maybe a bench." She smiled. "And I'll paint the door. Something bright." They slept that night with the windows cracked, the scent of thaw and pine drifting through the house. Her body curled into his beneath the quilt, her breath warm against the hollow of his throat. There were no words needed. Not anymore. By early May, the house on the parcel stood straight and square, its walls chinked, its roof tarred against coming rains. Josephine hung muslin in the windows and unpacked the cedar box Zebediah had carved for her. She placed her mother's comb, a scrap of her father's measuring tape, and the blue ribbon from her hair inside. Then she closed the lid and set it on the shelf above the hearth. They moved in on the first clear Sunday. Zebediah carried her over the threshold, boots muddy and laughter in his throat. "You didn't have to do that," she said, arms around his neck. "I wanted to," he said, setting her down gently. "You belong here now." She looked around the single room, the stove already warm, the bed tucked beneath the loft, the shelves lined with jars. "I do." Later that week, they planted the plum saplings, 3 in a row along the south fence. She pressed her palm to the bare roots before covering them with soil. "Will they bloom next year?" she asked. "Maybe the year after," he said. "But they'll take." She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. "Like us." He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her against his side. "Exactly like us." The days stretched long with work mending fence, hauling water, marking rows for beans and squash, but the hours between were theirs. She read aloud on the porch in the evenings, her voice soft as wind through reeds. Zebediah whittled handles for the kitchen drawers and taught her how to gauge cloud shifts for weather. They learned each other the way one learns the ground underfoot, by walking it again and again until it no longer feels like borrowed land. By midsummer, her belly had begun to round beneath her apron. She didn't say anything the first time she felt it, just rested her hand there and closed her eyes. That evening, she placed Zebediah's hand over the same spot without a word. He stilled, then nodded. When the child came that winter, the snow was high and the moon full. Zebediah rode into town 3 days before, returned with the midwife and enough blankets to line the cabin twice over. Josephine labored through the night, her breath sharp, her grip unyielding. Zebediah never left her side. Their daughter came into the world with a cry that shook the rafters. Josephine held her close, sweat cooling on her brow, her voice raw with joy. "She's strong," she whispered. "She's yours," he said. They named her Eliza after the wildflowers that bloomed first along the creek. Come spring, Josephine walked the garden with Eliza swaddled against her chest. The plum trees had survived the frost. The rows of lettuce and peas rose green and sure. Zebediah repaired the porch rail with one arm while holding his daughter in the other, her fist wrapped tight around the collar of his shirt. Josephine set her ledger on the windowsill and dipped her pen. April 20th. First bloom. Zebediah's laugh across the field. Eliza smiled in her sleep. "We are growing." That evening, Zebediah kissed her slow and full, his hand cupping the back of her neck. She leaned into him with the ease of someone who knew her place in the world was right where she stood. They lay beside each other with the baby asleep in her cradle, the fire low, the windows dark. The wind moved over the roof in hushes and sighs, but inside the house all was still. Josephine rested her head on Zebediah's chest and closed her eyes. "I never thought it would be like this," she said. He kissed her hair. "It always could have been. Just needed the right beginning." And so they stayed side by side on the land they built, with love stitched into every board, every row of earth, every breath. Nothing would be easy, but everything would be theirs. And that was more than enough for always.